Hi everyone and welcome to this video. I am Yogender, and in this video I'll be speaking to you about how do you treat data as a product. Now very often your stakeholders or your leadership might come to you and say that hey, let's do one thing, let's treat our data as products when we're sharing it with the downstream stakeholders. Now while this sounds great, but the question is that what exactly does this mean? Now by definition this means that you treat data as an asset and you treat data as a first class object within an organization, and you apply all the components of a product to your data, which means that you apply product management principles, you have a business semantic layer, and also you define how do teams access your data as well. Now let's look at the components of a data product. The first part is that you basically have your data, which contains your data model or your tables, and along with that you have your schema and also the metadata. The next part is that you have the domain. You define the domain, which means that you have to define the metrics and the semantic transformations. And the reason is that you have to ensure that downstream teams are able to access your data and understand what this data set contains, even if they're not from, let's say, a tech background. The third part is how do teams access your data, which means that either you have, let's say, a nice user interface, or you have APIs defined, or they can just query your data. So all these things basically will go into a data products catalog, and this will form a single data product, and I'm sure there would be more data products as well. Now let's look at what or how do you enable converting a data to a data product. Now the first part is that you basically have to ensure alignment with the stakeholders. Now just as any other product that you work on, you have to ensure that you talk to your customers. In a similar way, you have to talk to your stakeholders, figure out what are their requirements before you start working on a features, and you define a data product roadmap as well. The second part is that you apply all the product management principles to this data as a product, which means that, like I said, like any other product, you have to define the specs, the requirements, and what exactly the engineers are going to work on. And that's again very important, so that what you're building is critical for the downstream stakeholders, and you're not building something which cannot be used or might not be used in the future. So along with this, you also have to figure out how to document, because again, you want the downstream stakeholders or even your colleagues to refer to that documentation and not, let's say, ping you on Slack every time. The third part is that how do you define a self-service tooling? Now, the downstream teams, they have to use this data product, and you don't want them pinging you every time to get access to this data, which means either you define a script, or you might be having some SQL query, or you have some fancy front end. But the point is that you have to figure out a way that these teams can access your data product. The fourth is that how do you ensure that there is consistent data quality across the data pipeline, right from when the data comes from source, undergoes transformation, and then ends up, let's say, in the data warehouse. The teams have to trust that this data is clean and they can use this data, let's say, for their algorithms or something else as well. Now you have to invest in, let's say, a lot of tools, and got to ensure that there are enough systems in place to figure out if there is something wrong. Now, these are areas which I have observed and which basically help in building data as a product. In case you have experienced some other points, please do share. Would be great to hear from you as well. And thank you so much for listening.